All right, I'm here, and we are on a Zoom call here with Western Reserve head football coach Ty Stevenson. How we doing, Coach?
Good. How are you guys?
I'm doing good, doing good. It's been an interesting week getting ready for these games. It's Wednesday. We're going into Thursday. Where are you at with preparations right now for these Hopewell-Loudon Chieftains?
Could have used a little less wind tonight at practice. It got pretty windy throughout the night, but Hopewell is obviously a really good football team. Have been for a long time. Coach Contribuo, I think he's got like 200 some wins. We know we're up against a big test. This offensive and defensive line that they have is very physical. And play really hard. They're going to be fundamentally sound. We're not. They're not going to beat themselves. We're going to have to make good plays. So far the 3 days we've had, we're happy with. We just got to make sure we put together good final Thursday practice tomorrow, and make sure we know what we're doing on Friday night.
Friday night's a big one. Now let's go back to last Friday night. Big win over Bluffton. What stood out to you when you went back and watched film Saturday? When you kind of like, all right, this is what we really did well.
Sure. We had those two big turnovers on our defensive side, and we punted the ball, and then we're able to get one back there. Those three takeaways were obviously big. I thought our offense played really well. Offensive line wise, I thought we were good. We're able to run the ball pretty decent. Quarterback threw for almost 200 yards. So anytime you put things together, run and throw for a couple hundred yards, usually things go pretty well. That Bluffton team scores 40 some points a game, and honestly, we only gave up 3 defensive touchdowns. One was they scored again on a pick six, and they scored on a field goal at the end of the half that probably should have never happened, but that's a whole other story. So I thought our defense played really well. And it'll take obviously another opportunity like that, and even better this week to be able to, try to shut these guys down a little bit.
Coach, this is a big matchup. Obviously, round two. These Chieftains coming off a bye. How do you think that helps them, or maybe even hurts them? Do you think this is a benefit for these teams coming off a bye?
When it went to 16 teams, I was against it. I liked the 8. I thought that was the right number. As we went along, I thought 16 was still not the right number. But I like this 12 better. Obviously, we weren't fortunate enough to get a bye. So I don't know exactly how that'll work, but we did have one. New London didn't have a team in 2020, I think it was. So we actually had a bye week 10. We ended up beating Gibsonburg week 11 of that year. So, I think it's all about how your coach does getting that thing going. And I'm sure Coach True did a great job of getting those guys ready. So they'll be fresh, and we're hoping that maybe they're a little bit rusty. That's what they kind of say. Some of those basketball guys, especially, they won't take buys. It'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. Because if you look at the college football playoff last year, none of those guys with buys won. So we're trying to use that as our advantage, hopefully.
And that's kind of where I was going with this. I don't know how this is going to play out. Obviously, we got to wait to see how this works out. But, those Chieftains, they've been playing with a lot of momentum going into week 10. They got all their guys back healthy. They got Kellen Frankert back, Joe Ewald back, a couple of key figures for them. And, they were playing really good football in week 10. I'm wondering, does that bye week slow them down, or does that just make them even more healthier going into this second week? So we're going to have to see how that works out.
Yep, and I would guess it doesn't slow them down. I would say that there's a something to be said about small schools like us that play 8 or 9 guys both ways, being able to use that bye week. Now these big schools, I don't think they wanted it because those guys are only playing 40, 50 snaps a night anyway. So I don't know that they need a bye, but I'm sure it'll help. It'll help Hopewell out.
Now, Coach, I want to talk about your quarterback situation. Quarterback went down with an injury earlier in the year. He had a guy step in. It was rough kind of getting things going, but you really started to play some really good football towards the end of the year. Talk about just the quarterback situation and just how that developed over the year. Cause you got your guy back now, right?
Yep. So Hayden Keith was a starter as a sophomore and junior. Then it was a third series of the year, kind of tweaked his knee a little bit. So he was out, didn't start play defense then week 7, I think it was, and then week 8 against Crestview, he came back to play quarterback. Colton Migro was the guy who stepped in for him, junior. Did a great job. Went through that St. Paul game and played really well. The Monroeville, we didn't have our best outing, but that's going to happen. But like say that first week, that Margaretta game was his first week at quarterback, and that's a heck of a team to have your first start at. So things didn't go that well that night, even though we had the ball inside the 7. I think 2 of our first 3 possessions come up empty, and things kind of snowballed from there. But No, so Hayden's been a starter for 3 years now. It's exciting to get him back, and he obviously throws a really good ball. Can run the ball pretty well and does a good job running our offense. So anytime you can get a senior back on the field, you're always happy to have that happen.
Now you also have a nice running back to hand the ball off to in the background, and Landon. Am I saying it right? Weigel.
Just wiggle, just like he's wiggling. Yep.
Wiggle.
Yep.
I like it. So Landon Wiggle,
yeah.
big time performance this year for you. Over 1,100 yards, just about 7 yards per carry, 25 touchdowns. Talk about his performance.
Yeah, I coached his brother a few years ago. He's a lot like him. He's a big, powerful back. Does a good job of hitting the hole hard. And when we ask him to catch a ball out of the backfield, when we ask him to block, he does a good job with that too. So, we're happy. He's a junior, so he's had a really good junior year for us. And anytime you get a guy over 1,000 yards and have, between the two quarterbacks, I think we're at like 1,800 yards or something. You're pretty happy with your offensive output.
Yeah, you guys are definitely balanced on both sides of the ball. Now, I want to talk about your defense because when I talked with Coach Calatrulio about what stands out to the most about your team, he said your defense. That was the one that kind of stood out to him on film. Just what is it about your defense that's really kept you in some games this year?
Well, I think our line is pretty good up front. And we'll see if we can stand up the test of his defensive line or his offensive line, because those guys are obviously really good. But I think our kids understand our scheme really well. Coach Eden does a great job putting a game plan together, and our kids, I think, really understand it and are confident in what they're doing. And they like to fly around and hit some people. So, hopefully we can play some pretty good defense. We shut a bunch of guys out during the regular season, like I said. And Bluffton, averages, I don't know, it was 40, mid 40s or something. We only gave up 3 touchdowns, so we're pretty happy with that performance there.
Now, this Chieftains team, they've got a really good defense, but man, what stands out to me when I watch them on film is the balance that they have on offense. I mean, if you shut down their run game, they're going to throw it over the top on you. If you shut down the pass game, they got plenty of weapons that they can run the ball with. What is it that you need to focus on this Friday in order for you guys to pick up a win?
Well, there aren't many games that aren't won that aren't started in the trenches. A lot of times that all, it sounds cliche or whatever, but it'll probably be the offensive and defensive lines that win this thing. I like to think we're similar to Hopewell in the fact that, we can run the ball, we can throw it, play pretty darn good defense. And we told our kids this is the best team we've played all year. And if you're fortunate enough to continue to advance in the playoffs, that's how it's going to be. So we haven't played a lot of week 12s at Western Reserve. So our community's excited. But it's going to take not turning the football over. Maybe you get a turnover to making sure that you take care of things up in the trenches. And then and I'm sure Coach would say the same thing. When opportunities arise, you got to be able to take them. You can't miss. If you got a guy running open, you can't miss that. You got a chance at a pick, you can't miss that. If you got a chance at a tackle in the backfield, you got to make sure that you take care of those things if you want to win games at this level.
Now, you guys have been able to shut teams down, and I like to think your run defense is probably your strength this year. Now, you can still, obviously, you can cover the pass as well. You guys are really good on both. You're balanced defensively. It stands out to me on stat sheet. You don't have one guy who really is the guy on. You have a bunch of guys who make a bunch of plays for you. Talk about the leadership. Where does that come from on this team?
So when I talk to the Fireless Conference coaches about our tackles, I said we don't have one guy with 90 tackles, but we have like 6 guys with 60-some tackles. And I said, I hope that doesn't affect our all league voting, because we got a bunch of guys that go make a bunch of tackles. And it starts with those 2 inside linebackers. Austin Kolb's a junior who started last year as a sophomore. Will Taylor is a kid who's a 2-way starter for us. We moved him from outside linebacker to inside this year. And those 2 guys in the middle really get that thing going. And then those D linemen with Blake Welch and Travis French and Caleb Carpenter and Braylon Witherspoon, those guys have to make sure that they're able to hold up and, what we're doing up front there. And hopefully we can do those things. And, if you can, at least try to slow down the run game a little bit and force them to pass, hopefully that will play into our advantage. But, we're going to be tough up front for that to happen.
Now, Coach, in playoff games like this, it could be a little bit of rain involved Friday night. Weather's not looking too good. Yeah. Special teams often play a factor in this. We talk about field position, flipping the field. How important is that? And what's the focus been like in that area this week?
Well, you could probably say that we beat Bluffton because of special teams. And, and we're always happy to win. You always say you can't lose a game on special teams. If you do that, that will not bode well for the off season. So, you got to make sure you cover everything. You got to, I'm sure they'll have a couple tricks up their sleeve. So we got to make sure that we know our assignments all the way into special teams, because, you get late, like say one there will be 1, 2, 3 plays in the middle of the game somewhere that probably make a big difference in this thing, and they may be special teams. You never know when that's going to hit, so you always got to be ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, coach. So what's been the biggest message this week to your team as you get ready for this matchup against Hopewell-Loudon in Bascom? Tough place to play.
Yeah. We've just talked about we want more. We want to play more football. We want to be together longer. We want to make sure that we do that. In order to do that, you got to have better attention to detail. You got to practice a little bit better every day. You got to make sure you're focused on the right things. Make sure you're watching the film. Make sure you know your checks. Make sure you know your reads. So, you like to think if you can do a lot of those things, all you're asking for at this point in time is a shot in the fourth quarter. Keep the game close, get to the fourth quarter, be right there, maybe make a couple plays and you get to pick up a W.
So what do you think are the biggest keys to victory on Friday night? If you guys are going to come away with a win, what's going to have to happen?
Up front, can't turn the football over, take advantage of plays when they're there.
There you go. All right, coach, what's the message to Rough Rider Nation heading into this one?
Hey, we're excited. We had a pretty good crowd. Drove 2 hours last week. We only got to drive 1 hour this week, so we're a little bit closer. Hopefully we can get a big crowd out there, be loud, and let's have some fun and see what happens.
I appreciate your time, coach. Once again, Western Reserve head football coach Ty Stevenson joining us here on Heart of Ohio Sports. Thanks again, coach.
All right, thanks, guys. Go Riders.